Was that really a retaliation? To many Iranians, certainly in diaspora, who have the option to freely discuss it, it was humiliation rather than retaliation. It just showed how limited Iran is. It's much weaker than the rhetoric of the regime has, want us to believe to be the case.
There was always one puzzling thing about America's attack on Iran over the weekend. Why did the oil price, always the most accurate barometer of danger in the Middle East, not go through the roof? It certainly rose by about 10%, but given the potential for Iran to bring havoc to the oil market by threatening the Straits of Hormuz, this was, to say the least, a muted reaction. While all the pundits talked about conflict in the Middle East sending the price above $100 a barrel, traders ignored all of that and continued to buy and sell at less than $80 a barrel, roughly where the price has been for about the past year. Perhaps what they knew and the pundits didn't is that the Trump trade is a real thing. The one thing consistent about the president is his inconsistency, and the traders were counting on another swift change in direction. They were right. After the attack came last night's sudden announcement of a ceasefire, the same pattern being repeated, like we had with the pause after that initial spate of tariffs at the inauguration, the climb down after the Liberation Day tariffs, the threat to sack the head of America's central bank, quickly followed by an immediate withdrawal. That is the Trump way. Fine for Trump, not so easy for the rest of us. After this latest sudden change of direction, all we're left with is questions. Will the ceasefire really hold? Has Iran really lost its ability to make nuclear weapons? Will Israel be happy to follow the US line and not continue to push to topple the Iranian government? Despite all the frenetic activity, we are in many ways back where we were a month ago, and certainly no closer to a lasting peace in the Middle East. Well, Israel accused Iran of breaking the truce only 2 hours after it came into effect. Officials in Tehran denied this. Donald Trump has accused Israel of violating the ceasefire too. He was speaking on his way to the NATO summit in The Hague. He's not happy.
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
That was a rather blunt-speaking Donald Trump there on his air just before he got onto Air Force One coming to the NATO summit in The Hague. Well, let's get some insight from Philip H. Gordon. He was National Security Advisor to Kamala Harris as US Vice President. During the Obama administration, he was White House Coordinator for the Persian Gulf. He was involved in the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran, and he joins us. Philip, thanks very much for taking the time to speak to us. It's hard to know where to start, really, given what's happened over the past 12 hours or so. First of all, just your reaction to Donald Trump's announcement of a ceasefire?
First, good to be with you, and it is hard to know where to start. Look, his reaction to the ceasefire, I think what we saw in his anger that he expressed there in the clip that you just played, is that he's potentially on the verge of a real big success for him personally and for the United States here. He took a huge gamble in undertaking these strikes, joining the Israeli strikes on Iran. And it seemed to be working out. The U.S. seems to have set back the Iranian program significantly. And the biggest risk of all, we can talk about other risks, but the nearest term risk was a big escalation that drags the United States into war. And with that ceasefire that he unilaterally announced last night, he was on the verge of being able to say, I did it. I took out the program and I avoided a war, and all of you guys were wrong. But then the violations of the ceasefire obviously irritated him. Thus the profanity in his little interview there. He's probably also sleep deprived, been managing a war and heading to the NATO summit. But the ceasefire obviously would mean a lot to him because it would underscore, at least from his point of view, the success of what was really a risky policy.
Well, you talked about him being on the brink of a great success for the US in the Middle East. What does that success look like? What is an achievement that Trump has in mind?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say I think we're a long way from being able to confirm that success. What it would look like, it's possible, we don't know, a big gamble, but it's possible the version of success would be if Iran concluded from what just happened, which is the serious degrading of its nuclear program, setting it back months or maybe years. If Iran concluded from that this was just all entirely counterproductive, decades-long effort, spending billions of dollars or hundreds of billions, if you take also into account the sanctions that are put on the Iranian economy, all leading to military humiliation, wiping out of its air defenses, its proxies are wiped out, the Americans and the Israelis took out its nuclear program. If Iran concluded from that's just not the right path, and they don't want to spend the next few decades spending billions more to not have a nuclear program, then the proliferation risk would be over. Again, ideal world, best case scenario, Iran then decides that it even negotiates a deal to reassure the United States and others it's not pursuing nuclear weapons. Sanctions get lifted and they can start putting their oil resources to better use than on an enrichment program. And conflict is avoided and the nuclear challenge has been dealt with.
Do you think
that's the best case scenario?
But do you think the Iranian regime might agree to forego nuclear enrichment altogether?
Probably not. That's what the Trump administration tried to force them to do diplomatically before, Israel at least decided that they weren't satisfied with that and they were going to preempt it with military force. Iran has been totally wedded to its enrichment program, ostensibly because it wants nuclear energy, but in reality to preserve the possibility of developing a nuclear weapons program as a deterrent to save the regime and deter countries from intervening. The irony of that, of course, is that their determination to have that potential nuclear deterrent to save the regime is the one thing that actually led countries, Israel and the United States, to use force against Iran. So I don't think they'll give up enrichment. They'll probably conclude from this, not what I said in the best case scenario where they give up the nuclear program, but that they absolutely need it. And before long could be back on their way to developing an enrichment program, forcing the US and Israel again to use force or to let them get away with it. It's one of the reasons it's so important to know how much of the program was actually destroyed. Because if they still have the capacity to enrich uranium, spin centrifuges, and if they still have that famous stockpile of 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, then they can start this process already and maybe do it in a more covert or dispersed way so it's not so vulnerable to military strikes.
The other thing, again, it just shows how fast moving the situation is. Over the weekend, we had the love-in between Trump and Netanyahu. They both seem to be singing from the same hymn sheet. But in those comments from Trump this morning, you see that split. He does not appear to be interested in regime change in Iran, or at least not pursuing that completely, whereas that is clearly Netanyahu's stated goal.
That's exactly right. And U.S. and Israeli interests don't align entirely on this. They align significantly. Both want to stop Iran from having a nuclear program and to interfere with the affairs of its neighbors and so on. But you're right. Netanyahu believes the real answer to this problem is to change the Iranian regime and get rid of the threat entirely. And Donald Trump, more than anything, was elected to avoid getting bogged down into wars in the Middle East. I don't even think Trump was planning to support the use of force to deal with the Iranian nuclear program. All signs were that he wanted a diplomatic deal. And he made clear publicly and privately he didn't want Israel to act. But Netanyahu had a different plan and preempted Trump. And then Trump found himself going along with it, not least because it seemed to work. But Trump has already shown himself he's largely aligned with Israel and he's very supportive of Israel. But he has shown himself willing to split with Israel, first in the negotiations with Iran in the first place. But he talked directly with Hamas about freeing an American hostage and not the Israeli hostages. He called off his escalation against the Houthis in Yemen, even without getting a guarantee that they wouldn't strike Israel. So he's shown himself willing to split with Netanyahu, and he just did now, making clear, look, we dealt with the nuclear program. I want my ceasefire. And it seems like Netanyahu is going to listen because he doesn't want to overly alienate Donald Trump.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. Philip H. Gordon, former U.S. National Security Advisor there. let's get more of an Iranian perspective on this. Joining me now is Alex Vatanka, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, born in Tehran, an expert in Iranian affairs. Alex, thank you very much for joining us. The same question that I posed first to Philip, really. How did you feel this morning when, what was your reaction when Donald Trump announced that ceasefire out of nowhere?
It's great to be with you. Look, I think obviously President Trump wanted to declare victory and do so fast, and he has good reasons right now to be able to, declare victory. So he has solid reasons to make sure this ceasefire is exactly what he has said it is, that the two parties, Israel and Iran, will stop essentially attacking one another. So now suddenly his credibility is at stake. I would just say in the sort of bigger picture of the last almost 2 weeks of conflict, there's no doubt that Trump over the course of these days moved closer and closer to the Israeli position. I mean, he started off by saying, let them fight it out, to come into close to endorsing the idea of regime change. He was probably playing with it when he started saying, regime change might not be a bad idea. But my point is that Trump has been the person here whose position has moved the most. But that could come to an end if he feels like he can now declare victory. He looks good. He can say to his political supporters at home who have been very skeptical about his decision to attack Iran, to say, actually, it's just a brilliant tactical move on my part, and it won't cost the United States much more, and we can move on, and the world is a safer place for it. So that narrative obviously depends that Iran and Israel stop attacking one another, and we have to wait and see. It seems to me both sides do want to end this, draw a line, if you will, in the sand and stop it for now.
Well, what's the mood like in Iran? The current regime is still intact, and Netanyahu talked about regime change. Trump, as you say, flirted with the idea, but they are still there. What do you hear from people in Iran?
So, the regime is declaring a victory of sorts. That's what we're hearing from senior officials who are still making statements. A lot of them have become silent because, media operations are very limited. Internet is more or less down with some exceptions. But what you're hearing is that the Americans and the Israelis thought they could come and bring us down. They failed. We are much more solid as an entity, as a country. So they're sort of declaring victory, if you will. Now, obviously, because of the lack of space to debate this victory that they're claiming they have. For example, what was that retaliation yesterday at Al Udeid in Qatar? Was that really a retaliation? To many Iranians, certainly in diaspora, who have the option to freely discuss it, it was humiliation rather than retaliation. It just showed how limited Iran is. It's much weaker than the rhetoric of the regime has, want us to believe to be the case. So, if you're in Iran right now and you don't have access to outside world, which is the case for many Iranians, you're hearing the Iranian regime's narrative. What is that narrative? Oh my God, we just hit the biggest American military base in all of Western Asia, Al Udeid, and the Americans begged us for a ceasefire, and here we are. That's the regime's narrative. Obviously, as we know, is a lot more complicated than that.
Well, what might the Israelis do now? Because as I was talking to Philip Gordon earlier, there is this, having been very close over the weekend, there is now this obvious split where he talked just before he got on the plane to come to the NATO summit. He was quite critical of the Israelis for firing after the ceasefire he declared. Do you think Israel will now continue and try and change the government in Iran?
I'm sure they would love to do that. It's a question of capacity. Israel has never done anything like that. The only country in this fight right now that has a track record in engaging in what in America is called nation building is the United States. It's Afghanistan, it's Iraq. If you want to go back to earlier cases, Vietnam, all those cases are exactly the sort of solid reason why an American president would not want to do that, because it didn't work out well. So that's the American position. If that American position does not change, which I suspect will not change, then the Israelis are on their own. They don't have the capacity to bring about regime change. They might probably very likely wanted to topple the regime from within, because they know what we all know. This is a highly, highly detested regime. 90% of Iranians would love to see this regime go, but it didn't implode. Will it implode going forward? That's a big question mark. And that could be something the Western powers focus on, because there must be cracks in the regime right now. The disaster that has happened to Iran in the last 12 days was their own choice. They could have chosen not to be in this war with the U.S. and Israel. There's nothing at Iranian national security interest level that requires them to fight these fights. It's an ideological obsession. And the man who's responsible for it is in hiding, Ali Khamenei. So, you would hope the regime will wake up if it survives. It will wake up and realize, and that was something that you heard Philip say, the billions of dollars, maybe trillions of dollars in direct and indirect costs that Iran has paid over the last 20 plus years really was wasted. There are alternative paths forward for the Iranian nation. But again, big question mark how this regime will come out of this conflict.
Alex, thank you very much. Alex Vitanka, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute. Well, let's check the mood in Israel now. Let's talk to Anna King, originally from London, moved to the country 37 years ago. She lives in Kakov Yakov, about 10 miles north of Jerusalem. Anna, thanks for taking the time to speak to us. How are you feeling at the moment? What's your view on what's happened in the last 24 hours?
Thank you for having me on. The overriding feeling right now is exhaustion. We've been waking up several times a night during the day. We're not even able to rest from the sirens. We get a pre-warning that some missiles are coming in and they may come to our area. So we have to be ready when the pre-siren starts out. So that's really exhausting. This morning was particularly bad. We had the first one at 5:30. I got back into bed about 20 minutes later, and the sirens went off again another 3 times.
Well, what do you actually do when the sirens come? Do you have somewhere where you can shelter, or what's the advice from the government to do?
So it depends. Buildings that were built after, before 20 years ago, more than 20 years old, do not have a built-in bomb shelter. A bomb shelter is just like a regular room in the house, but my house doesn't have one. And most of the houses where I live don't have. So I go to a neighbor who has a newer home. That means I get the pre-warning. I jump out of bed within about 30. We've got it down pat now. But we jump out of bed and we run towards my neighbor's house. She's given me a key to her house so that I can get in any time of day, morning, night. And then we wait to see if the missiles actually were reaching our area. So then there'll be a siren, and then we have to actually, the pre-warning is just to be in the vicinity of a bomb shelter. And then if the siren goes off, we have to go into the bomb shelter.
Things have been moving very quickly over the past week. We had the exchange between Israel and Iran. Then we had the American attack on Iran. Now a ceasefire declared. What's your hope for how this will resolve itself? What would you like to see happen in the next week or so?
Well, we have to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. We're hoping for peace in the region. We know that it's not going to be an easy ride. It's a bumpy ride. But I think that most people are in full support right now of the government and of what happened, what's been going on. None of us appreciate all the threats over the last few years from Iran and boasting about their nuclear capacities. This needed to be done. And we hope to see that, this interaction now has at least slowed Iran down and will bring ultimately peace to the region.
Slowed them down, but Benjamin Netanyahu has talked about changing the government or trying to bring about a change of the regime in Iran. That hasn't happened. I wonder if you fear we'll go back to the same cycle that we've had over the past 20 years.
I don't think so. I think that politically, Iran is weak right now. I think this was a good time to start, trying to bring about this, trying to destroy the nuclear capacities of them. I don't know if we have. I'm not a political person. I'm just, a mom and a wife sitting at home. But if that's what we need to do, if we need to bring political change, I think that, as your last guest just said, about 95% of Iran is with us. They also want change. And that would be an amazing thing to do. I don't know if we're able to.
Anna, thank you very much for taking the time to have a chat to us. That was Anna King, a British Israeli who lives near Jerusalem.